Thank you. You may be seated.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pieter van Willig, and I'm the Acting Dean of the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences. It's my great pleasure to welcome each of you here this afternoon, those of us who are here in person and also those online, to this very special occasion, namely the inaugural lecture of Professor Babette Rabie, full professor in the School of Public Leadership. The occasion is made perhaps even a little bit more special in that it takes place during the centenary year of the faculty, having started from very humble beginnings back in 1925 to today being the largest of Stellenbosch University's 10 faculties, transforming the economy and society. I would like to acknowledge Professor Deresh Ramjugannath, our Rector and Vice-Chancellor, Professor Richard Stevens, our Acting Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Learning and Teaching, Professor Ada Jansen, the Economic and Management Sciences Vice Dean for Learning and Teaching, Professor Chris van der Hoofen, the Senior Director of Stellenbosch Business School, and Professor Zwelinzima Ndevu, the Director of the School for Public Leadership. A number of Professor Rabie's friends and family are also here tonight. A special welcome to Professor Rabie's parents, Chris and Anna Smith. Anna can unfortunately not join us in person tonight. Her husband, Jaco, children Annika, Danielle, and Mornay, and sisters Anina, Marihan, and Sunay. Also present are colleagues from the School of Public Leadership, the broader Stellenbosch University community, and emeritus professors who have worked closely with Professor Rabie over the years. And of course, many of you are also joining us online, so a very warm welcome to you as well. As part of our traditions here at Stellenbosch University, newly appointed or promoted professors deliver an inaugural lecture, such as the one tonight, within the first year in their role. It is both a formal introduction to the professor, of the professor to the wider university and the public, and an opportunity for them to share their research, vision, and academic journey. An inaugural lecture is indeed an important milestone. It honors years of dedication, research, and teaching. And it allows us to look forward to the continued impact that the professor will have in the future. For us as the audience, it's also a chance to connect more deeply with their work and to be inspired by the passion and purpose that they bring to the academy. We are therefore pleased to have you here to join us in celebrating this significant accomplishment, and to enjoy Professor Rabie's lecture entitled Nudging Evidence Use Practice in the Public Sector. Before I hand over to Prof. Rabie, allow me to share a brief overview of a distinguished academic journey. Professor Babette Rabie is professor and head of the Masters of Public Administration program in the School of Public Leadership. Her teaching and research focus on public policy design, performance management, and the institutionalization of monitoring and evaluation systems, work of great importance given the current public scrutiny on government performance in South Africa. Her advisory work extends to government, development, and NGOs, where she supports the use of evidence once again in policy making and evaluation. Notably, she has contributed to several international projects, including work with the World Bank in the Seychelles. Further than that, she is also a committed teacher, engaging students across undergraduate, honors, and master's levels. Her excellence has been recognized through multiple awards, including Top Lecturer and Best Online Lecturer more recently during COVID, highlighting both her expertise and her dedication to her students. Finally, but certainly not least, Professor Rabie is an NRFC 2-rated researcher whose work strengthens the evidence ecosystem to improve public decision-making. Her contributions ensure that knowledge is not only generated, but also used to shape public policy and practice in meaningful ways in service of society. Now, of course, there are many more accolades that I can mention. But instead, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Babette Rabie to deliver her inaugural lecture.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate everyone coming out on a Tuesday evening. It is absolutely horrible, but I'm very grateful that you have made the time. If you would allow me just an opportunity to thank a few people that have made a special contribution in my life. I would like to say a special word of welcome to Professor Fani Kluter, who's taken a very early interest in my career and has been an incredible mentor during my entire academic journey. I can still send him stuff and say, please, Fani, look at this, and he drops everything and he helps me. I wish that everybody can have a mentor like that. Professor Johan Berger is not joining us here tonight, but I do want to thank him in his absence for the many doors that he has opened over the course of my career. And I'd like to say thank you to the current director, Zwelin Devo, for trying to teach me diplomacy. So if you see him looking very tired, please know that he has a lot on his plate. Thank you to all the colleagues that's joining here tonight. It is absolutely lovely to see you. A very warm welcome to my parents who is joining us here, to my sisters, to my husband, to my wonderful children. It's very, you kind of stuck with me. So the rest of you have a choice. They stuck with me, but I appreciate that you stick around, and I appreciate your support here and the love that this family brings to each other. And then thank you to the team that organized the event, for all the AV and everything that runs behind the scene. But most importantly, thank you for the guys that does the catering, because that is actually the only reason why this whole thing is worth it and why we make it through. So we're very pleased to do that. So traditionally we start with a bit of an orientation. I was born in Pretoria. I grew up in Mossel Bay. Many memories of beach-filled days, walking in the forests in Knysna, and the annual Groot Trek up to the Kruger National Park, and then reading the entire library, probably 2 or 3 times, because it wasn't a particularly large library, but the love of reading has always been there. My father, from a very young age, told us all that we will go to university. He was a strong proponent for postgraduate studies, and he told us we can study whatever we want to once we've finished our medical degrees. So sorry, Dad, that didn't work out on any of us, but I did come to university, and I enrolled for a degree in industrial psychology. And I had to choose between economics or I think accounting or business management or public and development management. And since both the others sounded like mathematics, which I wasn't particularly fond of, I decided to go for public and development management. And our first classes was actually in this building right on the top floor. And Prof. Frederik Eis will come with his lever arch file down the corridor, and he will reverently open it and take out transparencies, black and white transparencies, and put it on this dark projector. And then he taught us about trias politica. And in the second year, Fani was teaching us about public policy and the Tiger Cups and how they stumbled. And Kobus Miller was teaching us about achieving broad-based sustainable development. And we were taught by Ishmael Davis about poverty traps and how everything you try eventually maybe doesn't work and doesn't make a difference. And I absolutely loved it. And so I found myself at postgraduate level actually enrolling for postgrad in public and development management. And I find myself 20 years later still standing here, still trying to figure out how to make this work. And so from time to time I would look beyond the university and ask myself, do you think you're old enough to graduate yet? And then I discover nobody else is willing to pay you to read and tell stories. And so eventually I stay, and I am still here. So that's a bit about the background and how I got there. And then maybe to also understand how I got into this field. So I started to write my PhD on local economic development, and my main interest was to understand how can we solve the economic problem? How can we solve the problem of unemployment? And it seemed very simple, because all you need to do is investigate what strategies work best. So if we can measure alternative development strategies, we can advise policymakers this works and this doesn't work, which unfortunately very soon panned out to be impossible, because firstly, the data was not there. Nobody was measuring outcomes. And second, policymakers were making choices based on gut feel and what felt sexy or what had worked in another environment. They were adopting policies that were simply not right for their particular environment or their locality. And these limitations were not limited to South Africa. At the time, the government-wide M&E system was being developed in the Office of the Presidency by Ian Goldman, Jabo Mate, and others, and it kind of resonated with the same idea. How do we strengthen evidence use? How do we create a culture of evidence use within government? And development of these systems are complex. It requires both technical knowledge, and it requires infrastructure and committed leadership. So you can't just have the systems there, you also need to have the culture that drives this. And so while an evidence-based approach sounds very nice, in practice it doesn't work that way. It's evidence-informed at best, but it's a political reality in which these decisions are made. And so at the time I was working for SAMEA and also chairperson of the South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association when we unpacked some of these complexities. In one of the earlier papers I wrote in trying to make sense of decision making, I mapped out individual reasons that drive policy decisions. And this was done within the Parliamentary Research Office, and I was trying to find out what happens in caucus, what happens in the portfolio committees, because this is where the real juicy stuff is actually happening. And so this first model says, well, there is evidence, great to say, it is there, but most of our decisions are actually driven by pragmatic considerations. Do we have the funding? Is it legally allowed? Is it permitted within the Constitution? And that's one of the strongest drivers in terms of what is the policy direction that we can take. And then also, what is your political party commitment? So what have we already committed to? What's the ideology and the vision of government at the day? Leaving you very little space to actually maneuver and do anything else. And then you have personal opinions, things that is important to the individual that they may attach onto. And so evidence is one of the factors, but evidence itself you need to unpack, because evidence is not rigorous, peer-reviewed, how large was your sample size evidence. It's a whole bucket of things. It's things that you find in popular media. It is a TikTok video that goes viral that reaches the ears of the policymaker. And all of these are evidence. It's things that they consider and that they move forward. So evidence definitely is complex. In a subsequent chapter with Prof. Ajam, we explored models, different people that tried to make sense of what was happening, looking at Lange, Goldman, Stewart, Crawley, and others. And in this, we said that some of these approaches suggest we should strengthen the organization. If you make the organization stronger, it is better equipped to deal and generate with evidence. Others said, no, you need to work on the production side so that there is useful evidence. So try and convince the researchers to do research on what is actually useful for policy making, which is like herding cats, because nobody tells a researcher what they are interested in. But I mean, some models focused on that, and then others focused on the interconnect between the two, the bridges. So how do we package evidence? How do we do knowledge brokering? How do advocacy groups use the available evidence in order to bridge the gap between the users and the producers of evidence? In one last piece of earlier research, I reviewed the OECD countries and I looked at how are they using evaluation and which of these countries are doing particularly well. And South Africa, when compared to other countries, have the laws, we have the systems, we have some political interest in evaluation, but our process is often too focused on compliance, ticking the boxes, selecting the easier indicators, selecting the easier targets, and it lacks resources. We do not necessarily produce high quality evidence that is useful for decision making. So ultimately your challenge is to build a culture of evidence use where people really value evidence use. And this is the latest in a line of models. I like drawing pictures. It looks nice when you put them on slides. So this is the latest in the models. And I'm not particularly fond of it now a month later after drawing it, because I think it's too much. There's too many elements in it. but it does capture a lot about what is important. So when you try to change an evidence system, there are individual factor considerations that you need to concentrate on. What are the values, the emotions, the prejudices of the individual decision maker? How do you connect them to networks where they can get evidence? How do you use peer pressure to create this culture of evidence use? Acknowledging that there is political party commitments that they need to accede to. So you need to strengthen it on an individual level, but each of these factors can be both a barrier and a driver of evidence use. So when you are connected to a particular evidence network, it provides you quick access from that paradigm, from that viewpoint, but it may cut you off from others. So you may use certain forms of evidence, but not others. So in the same way, each of these factors can actually leadership can drive evidence use, but it can also discourage evidence use. So you need to change it on the individual level. You also need to change it on the organizational level. And here it is about bringing in capacity. It's about dedicated systems for generating evidence, knowledge use, monitoring systems, evaluation systems, so that information that is available doesn't just go into a black box, but you can actually get it out, and that you can use it again for decision-making purposes. And so you also need to strengthen the organization with appropriate capacity and resources in order to strengthen the evidence system. And then lastly, on a systems level, you need the supportive policy framework. You again need a supported ICT infrastructure. You need to create intergovernmental relations to share information. And so ultimately, the three do not operate individually. They actually become part of an embedded system. If you strengthen the organization, it can actually package information that is then useful for decision makers. If you strengthen leaders, they can strengthen the organization. And the system factors strengthen everything throughout this. So I think I understand the system fairly well. And I think others fairly well understand the system, but it's not changing. It's not, we still have this compliance-driven system. And so we still find that despite our understanding of an evidence-based system, there's a weak link between evidence and decisions. In BCure work that Fani and I did, we tried to trace policy decisions from the evidence point back to where the actual decisions are taken, and it's not a linear line, and that makes it really complex and difficult to motivate that evidence actually does bring about desired results. Outside actors can play an important role to strengthen the evidence system, but lobby groups can also undermine good decisions where they package information in particular ways for a particular interest. And we see examples of this throughout the world, where we're increasingly seeing examples of state capture by lobbying groups that use evidence packaged in a particular way and presenting this to get particular decisions through. There's low uptake of evidence. Still, we see that only 20% of cases use evidence. Only 50% of managers regard it as important in their decision making. Good attitudes does not necessarily translate into action. You need to change the entire system in order to bring it forward. And as nicely summarized, comfort zones, risk aversion, all of these factors make it really hard. Performance is often compliance driven. We do it for the sake of doing it, and in many cases, we don't have the capacity to do it. So if the system is understood but complex, how do we change the behavior? Because in this complex system, behavioral change on an individual level is most important. If you're going to run into trouble where evidence can constantly be misused, a good culture of evidence is the only barrier that you have against that. And so I went back to economics, the thing that I didn't want to do in the first place. And I studied a bit of behavioral economics. So behavioral economics marries psychology with economics, and it really studies why or how people make particular choices. So it basically says we're not rational beings. At the end of the day, we make choices for very irrational reasons. And so that was the interest in understanding what are the factors that can drive these evidence decisions. So marketers know this very well. They use nudges. You have freedom of choice. You don't need to take this product, but they package it in a way, they place it in a way, they sell it to you in a way that ultimately you want it and you end up buying it. So it's the same thing. What if we can take this and we can convince people that you want to use evidence and it's going to make your life better, easier at the end of the day? So how can we nudge people forward? So there's a nice seminal paper by Thaler and Sunstein that says freedom is a good choice, a good thing, and so is variety of choice. But when you have too much freedom and too much choice, it's very hard to do the right thing. And this is the nature of policy making. You always have too many options, too many choices, too much information. So how do you make sense of it? And that's where nudging becomes interesting. How can we nudge people to take the right decision? So I started my interest here because I was interested to understand how discovery vitality got me to run. Because I'm inherently a very lazy person, but for 8 years I haven't missed that fitness target. I need to fill that circle every week. And so if you start to look at it, you can start to see how some of these principles are being applied. So you have bounded rationality. We understand fitness is important and it's complex, but they try to make it really simple. You get this wheel, and this wheel you need to fill, and if the wheel comes to the end, you've done what you're supposed to do. So just package it in a way that it's really simple. You need to frame it, so we gamify. You're going to get this reward, you're going to get this, coffee at the end of the day, which shouldn't matter, but somehow it does, because it's framed in a particular way. You can't level down, you have to get this through. You can use your vitality age as a score, that dreaded vitality age, which we all, I hope, fail. If you don't, please don't tell me. And it's a way of simplifying complexity into something to say, well, hey, things are off here. You get your points immediately. If you fail to do so, there's a loss of opportunity. And it's interesting that loss of opportunity drives us as strongly, if not more so, than the fact that you got the coffee. So the fact that I lost the coffee is worse than the fact that I got the coffee. And then there's social norms and peers. We compete with each other. There's leaderboards. There's different levels that you move through. Your family can become part of one board, and then they can also encourage you. And then the principle of mental accounting says that we put our money into different baskets. So things that I've gained through discovery miles, I can spend on something different. It doesn't become part of your normal budget. And typically what they try and encourage you to do is to invest it in further health-related activities. So if we take these principles, can we start to make evidence use better? Can we start to nudge people into a particular direction? So bounded rationality says we can process only a certain amount of information at a time. So don't give a policymaker a report of 700 pages, because they can't make sense of it. Give them a one-page summary where you've strategically taken out what you want them to see, what they need to act on. It's the work that we did, that I was participating in the Seychelles. We took 40-page reports, put it on a one-page, and we said, this is your evidence, this is what you need to do, this is the problem, this is the funding, make the following decision. And it simplifies that complexity so that the individual can make sense of that data. At an organizational level, instead of waiting for people to ask for information, design your monitoring and evaluation systems to push the information. So if you know that at a particular point there's discussions on IDP and there's certain information on the past 5 years that you should have, push the information at that point. It's more likely to be used when it's readily available. And we can build simulation platforms at a systems level that helps us to make complex data more digestible. The Gauteng Regional Observatory does excellent work in taking multiple statistical data sets and then presenting it in formats that we can actually make sense of that. So these kind of simulation platforms can help us to overcome that bounded rationality limitation. In the second principle, in framing effects, how you phrase things make a huge difference. So if we phrase results of a study to say this model explains 60% of what's going on, we can say this is very good. I mean, we understand 60% of the system. Or we can say there's 40% that's a bloody mystery and we have no idea what's going on. And it just sounds different. So when we frame things, we need to frame it to the policymakers that it sounds familiar. You use their language, you use their tones, and you use stories. You don't say to them, this reduces travel time by 10% or 15%. You say to them, Mrs. X is getting home 20 minutes earlier and can play with her children. And that's a familiar story. It's something in how you frame those results that connects better and enables policy decisions. at an organizational level, instead of presenting recommendations, which is something that you can choose to do or not to do, present it as an action kit, because it implies something different. You need to take action. You need to do something immediately. And at systems level, we can invest in smarter governance, so not operational expense to invest in better monitoring and evaluation systems, but we call it smarter governance, which sells better at the end of the day. So heuristics and biases says that we use mental shortcuts to make decisions. We don't consider all the evidence, we consider some of the evidence. I think one of my favorites here is your initial statistic becomes an anchoring bias for anything else. So the first thing that you present to the policymaker, everything else that you present thereafter will be read in comparison or in contrast or within the context of that first statistic. So make sure that you present what you want to see in first, that you frame it in that way, that you have that anchoring bias. At an organizational level, we can do present evidence as an extension of what we're already doing. So don't tell people we're going to revise the system or we can do something new. They don't want to do anything new. You just say we're going to do things slightly different. It's going to be more simple and easier. So frame it within what is already in place so that it sounds easier to digest. You can have that mental shortcuts coming through. And maybe at systems level, use your experts to endorse your findings. Because the individual says, well, if expert so-and-so already said it's fine, then I don't need to really apply my mind. And then immediately you can push that through. Some of the other principles is more about encouraging behavioral change. So the present bias says, if you fill in this survey, you get a coffee. I got an email like that today. And so in a present bias, how do we make evidence use valuable, visible, and give people immediate benefit and results? So how do you give people instant recognition and results for using evidence instead of acknowledging it only retrospectively, maybe later on? Link your evidence to funding. So if you implement these recommendations within the next 6 months, there's additional funding available. You're going to lose that opportunity, which immediately also triggers a second heuristic. And so at systems level, we can have evidence excellence rewards. We have those already, but they're typically at the end of a lifetime. So it's a lifetime achievement reward, and those do not give you immediate benefit. So rather acknowledge those good practices where you see them immediately. Everything we know about performance management says the earlier you get the reward after doing the desired performance, the better that action will become embedded in practice. And so that's basically what we're trying to trigger here. Loss aversion says we feel the pain more strongly than the equivalent gain. And so we want to shift evidence from a nice to have to a need to have. Highlight the losses from inaction. If you do not take action now, this is the consequences of that. And this can happen at all levels, individual, organizational, or system level. At organizational level, you can focus on the political and financial risks of ignoring evidence. At international level, you can look at international standing and your image within international relations, and really trying to get people to use that evidence immediately. Status quo bias, people do what is preset, and opting out takes more time than opting in. And so at the individual level, you can pre-populate the template with all of the evidence. They can take it out. It's always free to take it out, but they're less likely to do so. They're more likely to leave it in and work with the evidence that's already there. So just pre-populating your templates can help you to nudge policy decisions forward. At an organizational level, offer implementation. Oh, where are we now? No, status quo. ICT dashboards can help us to link to evidence indicators. When you log on the morning, there's your dashboard, and the evidence is straight in your face. And you're more likely to use it simply because it's available. And in your systems level, we can change our reporting templates to have a compulsory session for evidence consultant. And again, it's about making it routine practice. If you don't do it, if it's compulsory, you're going to have trouble to get your report through. But in a sense, we're trying to encourage everybody that evidence use is the norm rather than an alternative way of doing things. Social norms and pressures. Keep an evidence leaderboard and recognize the evidence champions. I think we spoke a bit about this before already. Make the evidence fields compulsory, make this the norm, the way to do things. Basically, we're trying to get evidence use not as an isolated act, but really as the standard way of doing things, by recognizing there are excellent good practices out there, but they're seldom showcased. And this is, I think, what we're trying to put forward here. And the last principle is mental accounting. People often see evidence work as additional work. If you start to say to them, as part of your project plan, there is a day, there's 2 days that you must spend on this, it becomes part of the implementation of that plan. It's not additional work, it is the work that needs to happen. You can work it into individual performance agreements, making sure that it's part of the work that needs to happen, that it's acknowledged, and that it is rewarded at their end. At organizational level, you can ring fence your budgets, the budget for monitoring and evaluation for knowledge management, so that it cannot be spent on anything else. And you're going to lose it, loss aversion, if you don't spend it on this evidence generation. Maybe an annual evidence funds at system level can be useful to say collaborative projects between producers, users of evidence can access this fund when they bring these processes forward. So, in conclusion, the South African system is complex, it's multi-layered, it's influenced by factors at individual, organizational, and systems level. I think we've made great progress in building the infrastructure and for producing and sharing evidence, but there's still challenges. And the challenges is fragmented coordination, uneven capacity, and political and institutional barriers. And I think there's some use in understanding the system, and so the integrated model is useful in understanding what are all these components that need to work. But we also need to change the system at the level where it's most important, and that is at the behavioral change. And this is where I think we can nudge the system slightly forward with some of these lessons learned or suggestions that was offered here tonight. So as I conclude, if you notice the person next to you sleeping, kindly nudge them just a little bit. And then I wish to thank you all for listening. Thank you for coming, and I look forward to further opportunities to engage with you.
Thank you very much, Professor Rabie, for that absolutely fantastic lecture. I have to say it's the first time I've heard the word evidence used that many times in a lecture. So good evening to the Rabie family and friends, leadership of the School for Public Leadership and the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences, to our university leadership that's present, to our colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute privilege and pleasure to be with you this evening and to be part of and share in this inaugural lecture, which is effectively the introduction of Professor Rabie's academic scholarship and her research interests to the academic community at Stellenbosch University, but also to our community at large as an institution. I think as has been mentioned by Professor von Willik, the inaugural lecture is typically a rite of passage within the institution. So all this pomp and ceremony that we have, and I was speaking to Babette a bit earlier, she says, oh, I have to get this thing over with. I told her, absorb the event and what's taking place at this event, because it is very much a tradition as an academic institution in terms of what's taking place tonight. It's this kind of rite of passage of you now becoming a fully fledged professor at the institution, and it's this recognition of you having attained this academic rank within the institution. Attaining the academic rank of full professor is quite an achievement. Not many people in their journeys in academia will attain this particular rank. So you're going to be very proud of yourself, and your family and friends that are here this evening can be very proud of what you've been able to achieve at this institution. So typically it occurs whenever we have someone that is promoted to the rank of professor, full professor, or someone that is being bestowed with the rank having come into the university as a professor, you have achieved it in terms of being promoted into the full ranks of professor at the institution. So this event afforded you the opportunity to share with us your innovative ideas, your discoveries, your nice schematics in terms of how you understand this entire ecosystem of evidence-based decision-making, and this kind of deep insights into what is your discipline focus and is your academic scholarship and your interest. And this evening you shared with us your insights on evidence use practice and this entire ecosystem around evidence use. So thank you very much, Professor Rabie, for your lecture on nudging evidence use practice in the public sector. When I first read the title, I thought it was some sort of social media kind of nudging, but you explained that in terms of behavioral changes, kind of nudging behavior in the right direction. So thank you for that deeply engaging and thought-provoking lecture. So you've indicated to us that this whole thing about understanding the evidence ecosystem and about effecting the right kind of, first of all, utilization of evidence, but also about behavioral changes that need to take place is complex and can be used in a positive way. It can also be used in a negative way, as you've indicated with state capture and how that was undertaken. So it's about making informed, effective decisions. You also told us about the kind of integrated way in which we're going to start to look at evidence use models in terms of the utilization of evidence, and then about the behavioral economic principles and about how do you kind of shift behavior and promote the behavioral changes that you would want to see, and how nudges can be strategic. So I've listened with great intent because, you know, there's a lot of changes that I am effecting at the institution. And, you know, when I stand out at Senate asks for evidence in terms of how things should be done at the institution. So I've taken notes in terms of how we're going to get things done in terms of effecting the changes that need to take place in the institution. So a great learning exercise for me, at least. Now, one of the indicators of a good inaugural lecture is the ability of the professor to share deep and complex disciplinary knowledge, as we have heard this evening, in an understandable manner. Not just understandable to the academics in the room, but also understandable to the general audience in the room. And I'm sure, family and friends, you understood what Babette said, right, in terms of a lecture. She clearly articulated the novelty, she articulated the complexity of the work, but in a very understandable manner. And this is an incredible balancing act. And good professors are able to do this. Good professors are able to take very complex subject matter and make it easily understandable to the general audience. And Babette, you did that very well tonight. An incredible balancing act, and impeccably done this evening. I can safely say you've mastered the art of being a professor. So congratulations, Babette, on your body of research and work on evidence-based decision-making and about understanding it, but importantly about how we can be utilized. Your work does not simply add to academic knowledge, but it truly enhances our understanding and our insights into how we can effect the right kind of changes in the public sector and even in organizations. We are immensely proud of your work as Stellenbosch University, but also on your achievements. Keep up the fantastic work in helping us understand and improve our areas of knowledge with regards to public leadership and about effective change in organizations. You know, I like to say when we look at Stellenbosch University and we look at our vision statement as a university, the last 4 words of our vision statement, "in service of society," is the one I always emphasize, because I believe that everything we do as an organization, be it on the teaching and learning side, be it on the research and innovation side, must ultimately be in service of society. And your lecture today talked exactly about that. It's about how your work is going to be influencing policy and decision making in the public sector so that we are really, as an institution, being in service of society. Thank you very much once again, and congratulations. And now is the symbolic handing over of the scroll so that you can call yourself officially professor.
Vice Chancellor, I actually thought there's a program director, so I was waiting for my name to be called. Good evening, Vice Chancellor, Professor Stevens, the Acting Dean, Professor Janssen, the Director of the Business School, colleagues from SPL, colleagues from the faculty, and also colleagues from the university, family and friends, most importantly, Professor Rabie, your husband and the kids, family and friends that are here. Good evening, all of you. I have been asked to do one thing, just to do a vote of thanks. But I think, firstly, I must thank you, Prof. Rabie, for reminding us that evidence matters. I think if we forget anything that we have said today, as Prof has said, evidence does matter, and it matters to decision makers. On behalf of the university and the School of Public Leadership and this community that is here, I would like to extend a word of appreciation to all of you for coming and attending this particular event and honoring this lecture of Professor Rabie. Let me acknowledge a few people. Because of time, I'm not going to acknowledge everyone that is here, but a few people that have played a bigger role in the background. Jonathan Dale for the hard work behind the scene. I think a lot of things that we see here, the organization and all of that would definitely have a hand in it. So thank you so much. Amira, I'm not sure whether she's still here. I haven't seen her yet. She's still there. Amira, thank you very much for also the hard work that you have done to ensure that this organization become a reality. Kuma from Corporate Communications, for your communication and ensuring that everybody that is here has indeed communicated to correctly. The editor, I know the editor might not be here. Prof. Rabie said I must specifically acknowledge the editor because of the hard work. We normally don't acknowledge editors because we present this work as ours. But I do take note, Prof. Rabie, of the fact that the editor we should note. And also, let me also thank MJ Brooks for donating or paying for the snacks as I invite you to join us outside for the snacks. Colleagues, thank you so much. I will be guided in terms of the proceedings going out, but there is snacks outside.
Babette's feast, apparently.
Sorry?
It's Babette's feast.
It's Babette's feast, okay. There is snacks outside, and please do have some wine as well as I think many of Babette students that I see here have so many questions when I look at their faces. So Babette would have to answer so many questions. When you provoke, as you said, Prof, if you start dissecting these ideas so simple that people will then all have to interrogate them. So Babette, you have brought this to yourself. Thank you very much, colleagues. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. Can I please ask you to stand as the procession leaves the venue? Thank you. You can enjoy the refreshments.